of knowledge. And that was interesting to me because, Africanization of knowledge, makes us think of, oh, knowledge is something that exists out there, and then we can make it African. Whereas there are knowledges, ways of being, ways of doing things, technologies, economies that have been exploited, and we are left with something sort of a carcass. And now we are thinking, how do we get that back? And so these kinds of things make you really wonder, about our trajectory as a continent. Because if we can't fix, our educational system, we definitely would have a longer way to go. So without testifying as a lawyer in court, I'm going to just move to the first question, and I will be starting with Dr. Hadiza Abdulrahman. And I would like you to share with us what are the key representations of colonial legacies of education, and how, in your opinion, have they shaped the knowledge landscape?
Once again, really welcome everyone. I can see some of my people in the audience. I always like to start by reiterating our relationality. So thank you to everyone who has joined us today. Key representations. Just us being here, I do not know how I can tell you my story to decolonization without telling you a bit of the story about my PhD. So I did a PhD on Almajiranchi system of Northern Nigeria. And I think for me, the journey started when I kept on reading and then engaging with reading and accessing reading that hadn't been given to me. I schooled first, second, third degree in Nigeria. And some of the things I was reading for my PhD, that was the first time I had come across them. And these were things that were very pertinent to me, especially as a Northern Nigerian, and yet I hadn't been given it in mainstream school. And then it led me to the question of what we think knowledge is and who gets to tell us what knowledge is. So these are the questions that I battle with in my scholarship. What is knowledge? What is regarded as valid and valued knowledge, and who gets to tell you what that is? So that began my journey towards decolonization, as we like to call it. But I feel for me, in my journey, decolonization is really about critical thinking. At the bottom line, this is what it is about. And it is about, like I tell my students all the time in my first session, my primary job is to teach you to be crap detectors, excuse my language. And that's anybody's crap, right? It's just to teach you to see through things. And that's what the framing is for me. So when you talk about the legacies of colonization, for me, is the knowledges they foreclose. Is the knowledges that they subjugate, is the things that didn't make it into our curriculum, is the things that we did not have access to, is the things that we were told were not important, yet are our stories. So for me, decolonization is constantly about unlearning, is about learning to see more than what has been shown you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. You hit me with that. Decolonization is all about critical thinking. And that is so true. Bell Hooks shares with us that when we think critically, then we are able to make sense of the world around us. And we have been taught to not think much about the world around us, whereas that is where everything really is happening. Thank you so much for sharing that. If I can move to Baraka quickly, can you share with us, in your opinion and in your scholarship, what you have identified as key representations of colonization or coloniality, as Seba Tamale would call it, in our educational systems in Africa? Baraka, are you there? I think there might be an internet issue, but we will kind of carry on and not be deterred by that. Yes, so I'm going to move on.
Sorry, I think my internet freaked out.
Yes, yes.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. We realized that. Thank you. So I don't know if you got the question, or would you like me to ask it again?
Please, could you ask it again?
Absolutely. I said, we are thinking about the key representations of colonial legacies of education, and how do they shape the knowledge landscape in Africa?
Yeah, okay. Just start off also, I'd like to talk about my journey to decolonization. I studied Middle Eastern Studies and Development Studies for my undergrad. And from that, I got to see that a lot of development issues stemmed from lack of knowing. So because of that, I was very much curious about how to educate people. So I came back to Nigeria, and I while I was doing my NYSC, I became so much more interested in the concept of education and how in my mind, I thought probably part of the issue was that there was a lack of access to quality education. But then, so because of that, I decided to do education and international development for my master's. And while I was doing that, that was when I became so much more curious about how did we get where we are? How did how, how come the education can't get good? I think that's the best way I could think of it. It just seemed like there was a disconnect between us and the education we were receiving. So I started to do a lot of research on colonization, because I figured when you go to school in Nigeria, they teach you about all these things about the beginning of Nigeria, but it never seemed like we had an origin beyond that. So as I did my research, I realized that everything that exists within the system I grew up in was colonial. And so to fully understand the concepts of what was wrong, you have to investigate colonization and its effects on our system. So because of that, I discovered a few things. Ultimately, I guess an education is just how we acquire our knowledge. And I feel that based on my investigations, I feel every single part of our system is colonial legacy. Our countries ourselves are colonial legacies. White people created our countries without our permission. They left us with it. And to me, I just feel like there was never really a disconnect between what they created versus what we wanted. Independence was just something they handed to us because it was convenient for them. And the educational systems, our schooling, the structures that exist have everything to do with them. You know, neocolonialism is a thing that I think everyone needs to acknowledge. And it's something that affects every single part of our identity, whether it's how we have to go to school, whether it's how we join our governments, the language we speak. We're speaking in English. How are we fluent in English? Because that was what colonizers left for us. A lot of all of this, to me, just was, it seems traceable. It seems that our identity was taken away from us because ultimately what we find is that they did not see us as humans. So they called it the mission to civilize, but ultimately what they did was they stripped us of our identity and they handed us this hegemonic identity, which was very much an African, because there's nothing more diverse than the African identity. Your neighbors are not like you. They don't speak your language, but you figure out a way to communicate and you figure out a way to flourish. African kingdoms have flourished in diversity in the past prior to colonization. But because of our re-education, we have been taught that it's not possible. So I think the whole system is broken and needs to be reconfigured. So there are key representatives of coloniality in every single thing that we do.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight that you've shared with us. Because, you know, sometimes it feels like we want to attack a topic and then it feels like, oh, you know, what are these things? But I love the fact that you took us all the way back to think about even the formation of these countries. You know, I was talking about, talking with a friend earlier today, and we were talking about borders and how it was really convenient to create those borders, you know, because obviously you have to determine who owns what. And so you demarcate all the land, and then that's what we are stuck with today. And really, thank you for showing us, you know, for reminding us that everything we kind of know from, you know, from school system is embedded in that. I remember clearly, you know, I resonate with your experience of learning about colonization. I think I was 5 or 6 before I realized that colonization was a bad thing, because what we were taught was that it was a good thing. and that there was this, and I think one of the earlier questions I asked was about River Niger. I just realized, I remember I was saying, how can you discover a river that people were bathing in and drinking from? And and it didn't really add up, right? And so it's important for us to kind of uncover all of these things so that we can actually determine where to begin the movement toward wholeness from. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna move on quickly to other questions. And so I want to talk about agency, particularly epistemic agency. I remember earlier that Dr. Hadiza spoke about who determines what is knowledge, who determines what is good, who determines what should be known, and then who gets to know, who gets to name, and we know for sure that there is still, some level of, and I'm being modest, to say there is a level of epistemic colonization, where knowledge coming out of the continent is regarded as inferior, especially the knowledge coming out of this continent made by African women. And Fatima Keller said something last year in a report that she wrote about epistemic agency within the economic justice space, and said that, that because of the aid system, which obviously we can trace right back to structural adjustment programs, Africans in general, but particularly African women, have been viewed perpetually as takers and victims, and therefore it is difficult to connect, like, oh, maybe these people know what they're doing, maybe this knowledge, is something that we can learn from. So I'm gonna point this question to Baraka, and I will go to Dr. Hadiza afterward, but I would like you to share with us in what ways has the deprivation of epistemic agency, and if you want to speak to agency in general, please go for it, affected the idea and practice of education in Nigeria. I said in Nigeria, in Africa. Thank you. Baraka, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes, I was saying, just starting off from the point you made about the inferiority of African knowledge. I remember there was a paper called Pre-Colonial and Decolonial Dialogues, written by an academic from the UK. She's from South Asian descent. Her name, I think, is Gurminda something. I can't remember. Gurminda Bamra, I think her name is. She talks about the history of decolonization and the concept of decoloniality, and how all of the major voices, she does not acknowledge a single African or a Black person in general. It's almost like a dismissal of people that all of the greats that contributed to that have consistently contributed. Because right from the outset, Africans have been part of this decolonial argument, part of rejection of colonization, whether you're talking about people who, the moment colonization started, they said no. When you think about things like that and you think, okay, so why are we still living, when you say things like we live in the 21st century, why are we still looking at certain people as lower than others? It's a reality that I think Africans still have to live in every single day, just not being acknowledged. And then even within our own curriculums, in our own schools, Africans still only read from European writers, and the few that are in there, you're a Nigerian and you think someone like Chinua Achebe being in literature is such an achievement. Like, it's almost like they figure out a way to make it seem like it is a pedestal that we want to be on, and we have to attain a certain level of expertise, a certain level of being perfect before you can then join them. So it's like, why can't somebody's less, why do I have to read 10 white people before I read a single Black person? To me, I just feel like that is part of taking away our agency, saying to us that we cannot be part of the conversation. And just Eurocentrism and the things that Eurocentric thinking forces upon us, the dominance of their type of knowledge, is something that needs to be rejected constantly by us. Because if we don't, I feel, sit down and recognize that things like capitalism, things like saying we can't choose our governments without their ways, saying that anything outside of democracy, which if we look at today's landscape of the world, you would realize, we will all realize that there's no such thing as democracy. Today you look at Israel and they say to you that it's the only democracy in the Middle East. But if you talk to anyone in the streets of Israel, they'll tell you they do not like who their leader is, and it seems that if you're less than human, it's because you're not white, then you're not worth acknowledging. These international rules that they place upon us are just placed for them. So they teach us these things, saying that we don't know how to do these things, and we are developing countries, or we're the third world country. We're always trying to achieve a certain, where it's almost like we're chasing them. And because we're always behind them, I don't think we can gain back our agency until we get to the point where we realize we can create our own rules and we can create our own international. I believe that the only way to gain back agency is reject the ways they've divided us and accept the way they have also labeled us as the other, not just as Africans, but just in general, people from the global South. I feel taking back agency means working together.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I don't want to comment on that because that was just beautiful. I'm going to just move on straight to Dr. Hadiza. And yeah, just take us through your mind in terms of agency in the acquisition and practice of knowledge. And where is African knowledge on the global stage? And not in terms of, we're not seeking permission. We're speaking about work that is being done on the continent that is informing, the things that we do. What do we do with that? Thank you.
So one of the things that I want to say is that you do not know what you don't know. I think that's important to start with. That if you're talking about epistemic agency, and for me, epistemic agency is about taking responsibility for one's own learning and advancement of their own understanding. How do you take responsibility when you do not even know that you do not know? When what you have access to is carefully curated, right? So some of the things I work with, and I think I need to take it back, because sometimes one of the things that we do in these spaces is that we use words that people do not understand, things like epistemic, things like epistemology, things like that. We need to bring it back, right, to language that everyone would understand. And for me, it's about that question of knowledge. It's about that question of knowledge and what it is for, and what counts as knowledge that is valid and valued and valorized and seen as worthy, right? And so when we talk about epistemic agency, for me, the question of agency is about not waiting for anyone to validate what you value, but finding ways to embed it in your realities, right? So when I'm talking decolonization, because I still give talks on that, and people are like, you're still going on about colonization? It's been over. Nigeria has been independent for 60 years. And I tell them that I work with coloniality, right? And this is from the Latin American thinking schools, but it's also from scholars like Sabelo and Lovugacheni, who I've written with, and Foluke Adebisi, and amazing scholars. I have Riyad Gamur here as well. Like, so many people are working with that, right? I work with coloniality. And I think that's important, because colonialism as a basis is still functioning, is a functioning of modernity, is modernity's underbelly, right? And so there are three different kinds of coloniality that I work with. And it's not mine, it's Cuyano and Maldonado Torres, and all these people have pushed it forward. There are three different kinds. We have of being, and we have of knowledge, and we have of power. The way that the world is organized is still very colonial. Our knowledge systems is still very colonial. The way we see ourselves is still very colonial. And that's some of my frustration, because we all get co-opted into its logic again and again. Even when you're fighting it, it co-opts you back into its logic. So you do not just unlearn once, you have to keep unlearning, because our whole education system, and I'm trying to remember this amazing guy, Inyamjo, says, is like climbing the Kilimanjaro of Western performative ideals, right? We are constantly trying to play to somebody else's ideals. And so then you can imagine of the various colonialities that we're functioning with. I have my notes here because I don't want to forget anything. It's interfered. Colonial modernity has interfered with every social meaning making ways of knowing, imagining, and seeing. That's by Ndlovu Gachini. It's exertion of hegemonic power and oppression. It's about asymmetrical power structures centered around countries in the global north. But it's also about curricula. It's about wider society. It's about African forms of expression and ways of knowing, right? It's in every little thing. And I can give you common examples such as, gosh, even things like colorism, right? Something as simple as colorism. I grew up in northern Nigeria, and we have proverbs that would tell you things like, "Wankam baki asaranwa." And what that means is that if you're a Black person and you're bath, you're just wasting water because you're not going to make yourself lighter. Like, it's the way we valorize things that are connected. Proximity to whiteness, not just in color, but in every single thing. And I have to warn, like I said, we keep getting co-opted back into its logic. In our head, we know that this doesn't make sense, but it's so shiny and captivating and attractive because knowledge in itself is linked with power. You can't decouple the question of knowledge without power. So there's a knowledge-power dynamic that goes back and forth. Everyone wants knowledge that is powerful because we know that some knowledges give you access to the perquisites of power, right? If you do not have a degree or even you've been to Harvard and Yale and Cambridge and Oxford, there are doors it opens for you, right? The doctor in front of my name would give me some credibility. Let's call it what it is, right? Knowledge is linked with power. And then it becomes a question of what knowledge is seen as powerful and calling it what it is. That for me is epistemic agency, is knowing the workings of power and knowledge and walking into it with your eyes open.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that powerful. Yeah, I felt like you took me to class, and I'm just like, yes. I really thank you so much for that. Absolutely. I'm a bit short of words. Knowledge makes me so emotional. Absolutely, and when you speak of, that the fact that we get co-opted, even in times where we are not charmed and it's not that captivating, you share with us, is an expression of power. It is power brokering. So if either you shape up or you shift out, sometimes you don't even have an option than to kind of adhere to these systems. And I really, really, resonate with that. I'm going to give an example of something really, really comical, probably not, but so a few years ago, I think I was 20, that's more than a few years ago, I thought I was a minimalist, right? I was like, clean lines, white walls. Excuse me, I'm from Ekiti, where there are like beautiful paintings on walls, and our own things are beautiful, but for some reason I just thought, what, I'm a minimalist now. And it was random. I looked at myself and I was like, what part of you is minimalist? If I'm speaking here, you can hear 3 houses away. So what are you on about when you say, white walls and clean lines, where you are from places where, there's vibrant colors, not just outfits, in the way our parents and our grandparents decorated. You decorate with the things that mean something to you, with the things that and you find out that we begin to aspire to this almost meaningless ideal where everything is surgical and meaningless. When I come from a place where community and warmth and hot food and all of those things are just things that I grew up with. And you were very right. We get co-opted from time and time again. We think that we can refine ourselves, and I'm saying we, as a sweeping generalization, that we feel like we can refine ourselves to this particular standard, and that is a level of coloniality that really, really bugs me, because there isn't a standard. The standard is forever changing. It's like the patriarchy. You're going to adhere to the whims and caprices of this part of society that continues to shift the goalposts, right? And so these are things that we really need to consider. Really, thank you so much to Baraka and Dr. Hadiza. And one of the things that Baraka mentioned in terms of, where is our work on the global stage and how we are put in a place where there is a competition, right? Is the manufacturing of scarcity and saying there can only be one voice in the room, the manufacturing of awards, and then watch people just kind of like fight to get to the top, whereas there is rich knowledge that we can tap from and all of that good stuff. I think another example I will give is to just talk about how violent the whole thing is, because sometimes it seems benign, but it is really, really violent in the way that sometimes we are not even sure what is happening, and this thing is really, fixing our minds in a certain direction. I've been working on a particular material on economic justice lately. And what I learned is that when you go on Google Scholar, whatever the channel is, and you're doing research, you have to sort through a lot of things to get to critical African thought on these topics. And I'm like, why are you the ones, for example, learning about the debt crisis, for example. You will sort through 20 IMF and World Bank articles that tell you that debt is a good thing, but come and take more money. I will tell you that Africa is in debt crisis, but paragraph 5 says, come and take more money, right? And you're wondering, what is going on? And then maybe you painstakingly scroll to page 4 of Google, and then you find critical African thought, critical feminist thought on these topics. And you're linking them to all of that, and you find that that leads me to what you said about taking responsibility for what we think knowledge is, and not coming at it from a piece of from being passive, to think about how can I take responsibility for this space, and how can we build this world of knowledge. And that's why at Innovation Alliance we are just into the world building work, because we realize that all hands have to be on deck in moving us from a place of coloniality to a place of critical, consciousness. Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing these with us. I think I'm going to move quickly to the next question. And before I do, I love the beautiful conversations happening in the chat box. I will be coming to the chat box to read through some of those things that we've been sharing. But if you have any questions, comments, and all of that, please continue to put in the chat box, or reserve them, because at the end of the conversation, we will be able to ask questions and give opinions and share reflections, on the topic of the day. So moving on, with this conversation, I would like us to kind of think about opportunities that are available to us in the unpacking and dismantling of, coloniality in terms of knowledge and intellectual practice on the continent. I love, the knowledge you shared. Please, if you can share reading materials, Dr. Hadiza, that would be amazing. I love the breaking down of knowledge, power, and I forgot the third one, but I found it really thoughtful and amazing. Please, I would appreciate reading materials if you can share with us. So what are the opportunities that we have as Africans to unpack and dismantle this coloniality of, knowledge, both in theory and practice? I will start with Dr. Hadiza, that will come to Baraka.
The Western classroom, and even my Nigerian classroom, didn't teach me this. I wasn't taught this. I found it accidentally. And I think that's one of the things that made me angry. It was the accidental nature and how easily I would have missed it. And I do not know how to tell you this without telling you a slight journey of my PhD. I started my PhD in 2011 in May, right? And I knew I wanted to research the Almajiranchi system of education. I don't know how many of you know that. If I do not bring Almajiri to any space, academic space, I don't feel like I have done my co-creators justice, because it's because of them and the work that they have enabled me to do that I'm here. 2011 May, I started PhD. 2011 November, I get a cancer diagnosis 5 months in, right? So I had to take a pause. It's not a sad story. It's a liberatory one. Because in that time, that 2 years that I was doing cancer treatment, I was still reading. I was reading. And everything I was reading about the Almajiranchi system of northern Nigeria was deficit theorization. It was pathological. If you put Almajiri in any search engine, you know what you would see. Images of them as beggars, as Boko Haram, as educationally backwards, as not educated. They make up Nigeria's 10 million out of school children. Out of school. But they're in school. Just not a school that we recognize or agree that is a school because it doesn't fit. So Western schooling, Western epistemology has given us this imaginary of Western-styled classrooms. If knowledge is not occurring within schools, it's not knowledge, right? Our indigenous education system, what we know that every single facet of our society, every space is a school. The homes are schools, our communities are schools, our elders are teachers. We learn from the wisdom of our elders, right? So we miss that. We miss the opportunity to access learning within ourselves, to organize what learning is and should be, right? During the pandemic, I remember panicking because I live in England. I've lived in England more than half my life now, sadly, and nicely. But I realized, gosh, do I even know how to grow a tomato? Like, can I grow a tomato? If supermarkets don't get refilled, would I starve? These were not taught me. These are important things. Anyway, my journey towards learning about Almajiranchi was what brought me to decolonization, because I realized that we had done them a huge disservice because they were learning differently. And because there are issues, social issues with the system, we took that social issue as an excuse to delegitimize their knowledge, right? And then I'm gonna fast you forward to when I collected data. And there's this man, because I researched the men who had been through the system. And one of them, at the end of everything, came with manuscripts. And the manuscripts are copies of the Quran that he had written by himself from memory. So he told me that he is writing the entire Quran from memory. For the Muslims amongst us, I know you would understand just how awe-inspiring that is. For me, that's PhD level work. And then we look around and we call these people uneducated because they are not educated in the Western way. These are the things that made me realize that there is more to knowledge to what I have been exposed to. So when you say, where can we access it? The disappointing answer is that it's not within our schools, because they are co-opted into capitalist logic, into colonial logic, that we still have to fight really hard to dismantle. I'm not even sure that I want it dismantled. I just like my empire naked. I want it seen. If I see what I'm dealing with, I can deal with you properly, right? And for all, I'll be so hypocritical if I stand here speaking the English that I'm speaking with the doctor in my name and I tell people I don't see the value in this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, let's see it for what it is, for what it has given us, but for what it has taken from us, and put back what it has taken from us so that we have the best of both worlds. As in, why not?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we begin from a place of critical awareness. Absolutely. Thank you. Baraka, thank you so much. So I would like to ask you the same question. What are the opportunities that you see for us to begin to unpack and dismantle? So now we're hearing that dismantling may not be the thing. It's about, being able to see the empire naked, because also this is a system that has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. I was watching a video about socialism yesterday, and the person was speaking about how before you get to socialism from capitalism, you must first descend into fascism. And it was scary, and it's the reality that we're living. However, we must dream. And so I love the idea of seeing the empire naked. That's one of the things I've been tapping into lately. I've been saying that I want the emperors of this world to walk naked. I need a situation where we look at the empire and we say, oh yeah, you're cute. And then we are able to continue to build our worlds and do the things that we need to do without getting sucked in there. So from your perspective, Baraka, what are the ways that we can unpack dismantle or watch naked the hegemony of education? Thank you.
I think to start off, I would like to connect two things. I think that one of the things that really kills Africa is hegemony, because it is the most unnatural thing for us, I think, as Africans, because where you could go to Europe and find a whole mass land where everyone is speaking English and everyone is speaking Spanish and Italian, that does not exist in Africa. Even within large mass lands where it's people who are Hausa, for instance, there are ethnic minorities living within them. They are their neighbors, they are their family, and they learn each other's languages and they speak each other's languages. So hegemony in and of itself is something that I think is the most un-African thing, that really, that I think the first step to dismantling and moving away from the European way is moving away from saying we are one. We are a diverse people, and we've lived with diversity for thousands of years, and there has never been anything wrong with that. There was I think I would like to tell a story that there was a time I was doing one of my assignments during my undergrad, and they told us to build a website for development, and we could choose whatever topic we wanted. So I chose education because I've always been interested in education. So I decided to look up people who are Nigerian and educated. And while I was doing that, one of the people I chose was a man. He's from Bauchi State, Saadu Zungur. He's been dead years and years ago. But while I was reading part of his story, I heard he grew up in an Islamic setting. He had memorized the Quran. He was already extremely educated before he ever encountered Western education. And Saadu Zungur goes to school. His education takes him all the way to Lagos. And while he was there, I remember reading something about him having an identity crisis about how should I dress? I'm now speaking these people's language. I'm not going to forget my language, of course. I'm not going to forget my religion, but I've also taken on their knowledge, and I've now learned that this is how you dress if you want to be civilized. And I remember learning that he had a moment where he realized, I get to keep their knowledge and I get to dress how I want, and I get to keep who I am. And he became one of the most anti-colonial people in the history of Nigeria that I've learned of. And he's inspired many people to be like him. And to me, I was inspired by him because it's something that allows you to see that you can take from them, because what they do is they take from us, and when I say us, I mean all of the people that they have labeled other. They have taken good things from us and they have labeled it theirs. And you made the example with River Niger, but it's beyond that. It's our ways of thinking, things that we believe in, whether it's things like even feminism is not something that was created by the white man. There was nothing more on feminist than that. The white way of thinking, a woman was property to them. But they got these ideas that women can be something from people they had labeled the other, and they took that on and they said it is theirs. And now, when I live in my particular society and I'm looking at it, and women are not just women, just different things that have been taken on so strongly by Western people have now, because I think we're fighting as a society, we're aware that there's something wrong with their ways because it's being forced upon us. And I, especially coming from a Hausa background, there's this rebelliousness of the Hausa people that goes, I don't want to be like the white man. And in turn, we are letting go of some of the things that they took from us and turned it into theirs. So I think to start off, one of the things that we need to do is we need to start reclaiming indigenous knowledge systems back and owning them and rehumanizing ourselves, realizing that they don't make us human and they don't create our being. Coloniality is not the end of us. We can accept it and reject it at the same time. We have to look at it as a thing that is the reality we live in. And because if you don't accept first, there's no way you can reject. Because if we accept, then we can learn from our mistakes and we can learn from all the different tools that they use to subjugate us and make us feel like we're chasing after them. We need new ways to empower ourselves by accepting our Africanness. It's the only way to gain back, agency is by figuring out self-determination and say, this is who I choose to be. Because if we ignore, there's a lot of, but it's not possible. When you're talking about post-colonial theory, which I don't believe we live in a post-colonial world, we live in a new colonial setting. Coloniality is something that needs to truly be considered if we want to accept and reject. As I've said, we have to redesign our way of thinking and stop looking at diversity like it's such a horrible thing. Like, stop thinking we can't speak different languages and still communicate with one another. We need and I think the most important thing that they took from us is through educating us not to think, teaching us that there's no way we can think without them. There's no way we can build our own institutions ourselves. When we have done that prior to their arrival, they took away, the most important thing they took away from us was critical thinking. And if we can take back critical thinking, if we can learn to think outside the box and think, yes, I am African, and yes, I can think, and yes, I can build new ideas, then I think that is the biggest conversation that can be had. And we need to collaborate with each other, not just as an African not as a Nigerian or a Ghanaian or a Kenyan. We need to think more as Africans so that we can collaborate and come up with the biggest steps out of the current system we're in. Because, my sister said to me one time that the one thing you can always count on is that Caucasians will not ever stand against each other, no matter what happens. So we need to figure out a way to never stand against each other and instead work together to come up with a new reality for ourselves.
I also just wanted to quickly add, thank you so much for that. So many things to talk about. Read Can the Subaltern Talk, Can the Subaltern Speak by,
Gayatri Spivak.
Thank you, Gayatri Spivak. Read that. I also wanted to just quickly add that because we're trying to see the emperor as naked, some of the legacies of colonialism, just in case you wonder why you keep getting co-opted back, includes ambiguity, right? It includes contradiction. It includes privilege. Some of us have inherited privileges. It also includes contempt. I think it was Laone who says one of the greatest legacies of Western schooling, especially in post-colonial societies, is the creation of new forms of social difference, right? So if you find yourself trying to unlearn and you're hitting resistance, because while it may be an intellectual exercise, it's also deeply embodied. This thing has become part of us. So if you're hitting resistance, it's important that you recognize the different ways that it functions. It's important that you recognize the different ways that it can what I call enclose your ability to break free. So there is a certain ontological security attached to it. We like the things we like, right? We like the things we know. We like the things that we're used to. Even if they're harmful, we still like those. Recognize the processes and recognize how difficult. It's not an easy thing. And like I say, it would keep co-opting you back into its logic because that's the way the world is. It is organized. Capitalism is the world's organizing principle. You can't be doing decolonization and be hungry. You need a job. Like, it will co-opt you back into its logic. So just find areas for subversion. Sometimes it's not an all-out war. Sometimes it's about subversion. So my area for subversion is my school with my sister, Funhouse. It's 13 years old. We get to teach within the curriculum, but in a way that makes our children critical thinkers, because I think that's the basis of everything.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, Baraka. I almost jumped out of my chair when you were speaking because yes to everything that was said. I can't even recap. Yes, my answer is yes to everything. I really, really appreciate, how you speak to to us, consistently on learning and relearning. And then when you mention, privilege and how we like what we like, right? One of the things that you find that you need to do when you get into this space of critical consciousness is that you're going to have to think about the things you like and why you like them, right? You're going to, at the beginning of my journey, I had to ask myself, do I really like a White House that does not have bowls and flower vases? Like, is that you? And then I realized that this is a function of behaving in a way that is in proximity, to the ideal of like whiteness as a thing. And so that question of consistently asking ourselves, there's something we say at Liberation Alliance all the time, that the self is the primary site, for liberation. It's the first site for liberation. We have to consistently liberate ourselves. We have to consistently question the things that we believe. And that's why one of the things we do is we just read as much as we can. We're like, we have to access and dwell within the space of knowledge that is outside the confines of the known, and for us to actually tread on those spaces. And I really appreciate, I really appreciate the way you've spoken to us today. We have one last question, but before that goes on, I want to quickly go through the chat so that I can bring the room together. For everyone who is listening, I love the conversations that we are having. Somebody mentioned something really cool that I would like you to react to. He said, even outside of formal or Western education, it's the idea of, I'm going to get to it. This is not only in formal education, it's also in the terms of our talent and ability to, for example, do our own research or come up with our own development strategies. Even as NGOs, we find that it is hard to amplify our voices on the global platforms, as it's so colonial in structure and processes. Somebody says, this reminds me, no, I'm going to stop saying somebody and just say their names. I'm so sorry. The person who said the other thing is Karen Pile. Then we have Riyad Gamor, who says, this reminds me of the importance of decolonizing ourselves and our minds. Ah, lovely. The pedestal which Sister Baraka is speaking about also reminds me of how the world is perceived, framed, and navigated through whiteness as a universal way of knowing and being. So many gems in the chat box. I'm going to read a couple more. We had an intervention from somebody who was writing to us from Algeria and saw so many similarities, so many points of relation between what we're talking about. I'm sorry. Yes, lovely. Oh, I'm from Algeria, but based in the UK. So much of these contributions shared today resonate with me, and how the education system in Algeria is still colonized, mostly through a French/Anglo-Saxon hegemonic ideologies. Therefore, coloniality, as Sister Hadiza said, is prevalent. These conversations around decolonization and coloniality in Algeria, without generalizing, of course, are never forefronted, unfortunately. Could be ignorance, lack of awareness, etc. As I was before reading about decolonizing scholarship, it is hard to bring Algerian colleagues and students together to unpack these experiences and start thinking from a decolonizing, localized Algerian standpoint. Wow, absolutely. I don't know if you have got any reactions to all those comments. Yes, please.
I do, and I'm trying to share a paper that I wrote with colleagues. It's Revisiting Inclusive Education in the Post-Colony. And it's a really, I like the way we've written it because it's a really paper, it's called a metalogue. So we use a dialogic approach. So I was trying to share it, but find the Revisiting Inclusive Education in the Post-Colony, Abdulrahman et al. And I just want to share what we said. We said education in post-colonial societies is complex and entangled with past and present exercise of global power. Multiple, often competing demands and influences shape education systems. One of the demands is for universal access to education, variously framed by the Education for All and inclusive education initiatives. These are in turn imbricated with global discourses of development, of aid, and an offer to imaginary of Western-style classrooms and knowledge. And I think somebody else mentioned aid and development goals. So because if someone is giving you money, that person is dictating and setting the tune. You have to play to that. and they would lead what your agenda should be, even when it's contrary to what you want them to be. And I think that is also another thing to remember, that as much as we're trying to decolonize, if we still keep going begging bowls in hands. So there's a deeper question about leadership, right? And followership. Because as much as we blame our leaders are us. They come from us. They did not come from nowhere. So there's a deeper question about leadership and followership. So things about somebody, I have a sister here who is saying, who plays the piper? Hi, Uwani, I see you. But yeah, who is setting the agenda? Who are our leaders? How are we as leaders and as followers? Because you cannot talk about decolonizing education without decolonizing leadership, decolonizing followership. What kind of leader and follower are you? And I do not know that we have an easy question. In that paper, we didn't finish it with a conclusion. We just raised pertinent issues and provocations. And I think that's the thing about the decolonization agenda. It is a provocation, and it is as yet unconcluded, because there's a story evolving, and we cannot even take for granted the strides that we have made in our consciousness, because we can go back. I have people asking people to recolonize Nigeria because of how bad leadership is. We have a brain drain going on at the moment. There's a Japa movement. It breaks my heart. But I know how hypocritical living in the West, but it's heartbreaking because of bad leadership. So like I said, the battles are many. And sometimes it feels like we're putting out small fires. And what I do know is what Baraka has said, and or I think it was you that also said with the Liberation Alliance, that the personal is political. So we have to start with ourselves as well, and bring it back to yourself. That's where change begins to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Baraka, I don't know if you have any contributions.
Yes, based on what she said, I would like to react to that a little bit.
Yes, please, go for
about
it.
leadership and the badness of leadership. To me, I've like I said, I studied development studies, and I feel like for me, everything goes back to the education. That's just the way my brain is set up. And I feel that, not that I feel, ultimately, our leaders are a product of the education that they have received. And part of the colonial legacy that has been left behind is that the colonizing elite did create a colonized elite. And ultimately, our leaders are there to set up and hold up the colonial structures. I feel, one thing we do talk about in development is, does development happen from a top-down approach or from a bottom-up approach? I think in the case of decolonizing, it has to be from a bottom-up approach. When you think about, you talked about can the subalterns speak, it's time that the subalterns figure out a way how to have voices, because if we rely on the colonized elites, we will never leave, because it's about money. I always try to explain to people, what are the chances? It's easy to say from just an analysis point of view, to say, if I was the president of so-so country, if I was the minister of blah, 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 I would do better. But it's another thing for you to look at, as an ordinary person, just something as simple as $1 million that is nothing to politicians. You say, give somebody $1 million and have them look the other way when bad things are happening. Chances are they're not going to look the other way. Sorry, they are going to look another way and just let it happen. Because another thing we have to consider is we're looking at humans, and humanity is just that which is weak. I will say humans are weak and we follow our hearts. So it's very, very difficult to ask for change from people who are benefiting from the subjugation of others, because ultimately those that are in leadership are a minority. The structure keeps them on top if they keep looking the other way. But it's people who have nothing to gain from and have nothing to lose that can fight a war. There's nothing stronger than an army that has nothing to lose. So ultimately, I feel that in this particular instance, it's not to say that there isn't something that leadership could do, but I just feel that there is more that could be done from the bottom, because as I said, the human heart is weak, and it's very difficult to ask anyone to say, don't serve yourself, serve the community first. You know, it's one thing to believe
Yeah.
in things like Ubuntu or whatnot, but like, are people really living the Ubuntu lifestyle? Probably not.
I love. Thank you so much for bringing the conversation. Here. So I'm thinking as you were speaking, and I was thinking about. Oh yeah, and to Hadiza said petit bourgeois. Yes, the class. I think that what we are experiencing on the continent. I watched a video a couple of days ago of a Ugandan minister who was saying that, people who are going hungry in Uganda are idiots. And, I just looked at him and I was like, you know what? Now, this conversation brings us to, so I tend to agree with our leaders are us, but I also tend to agree with our leaders are not us, because our leaders are us is basically saying that there is some sort of kind of solidarity, but we know there isn't solidarity in between classes. People are usually like loyal to to their social class, right? For example, like Baraka said, we can't convince the leaders or the people who are beneficiaries of this, neo-colonial system where they get to stand in for the colonizer, to kind of shift on the issues. And that's why we have chosen an approach of building a critical mass. So we have conversations like this so often. We plan to do them physically. We plan to do them in a multidisciplinary way, interdisciplinary as well, just to make sure that we're using all the tools to actually begin to build a critical mass of people who are really thinking. If you are on Twitter, you will know that the world is not fun and that there is a long way to go. Sometimes I see something that somebody says and I'm like, you know what? I may be mad, but this is colonial logic. It's extraction and subjugation. Like, I steal from you, I shut you up. Why am I shocked that a Black person or a fellow Nigerian or a fellow African is doing it? Because that's the education that they've gotten. And that was why I wanted to react to what you were saying, Baraka, in terms of the kind of education that we get, right? And to kind of segue from your comment about weakness, it reminds me of building a system where in a capitalist system where you know that the difference between you joining the being loyal to the hegemony and being dead is just that decision, right? There isn't so much gap to think, especially if you are poor, if you're a woman, if you are queer. There isn't a lot of leeway in those spaces. It's either you shape up or you ship out. So yes, the human is, I always say, we're an interesting species. I would like to study us, for example, just like, what was behind that behavior? However, we are a product of the education that we've gotten, both Western education and socialization, right? I always say that a lot of people, the 90s was pivotal on the continent. The 90s, it was when people realized that, oh yeah, so falling in line wouldn't work. And that gave birth to a whole lot of, a whole world in itself. I have an interesting question here. I don't even know if it's a question or a reflection. But when I saw it, I was like, you and me both. You and me both. Somebody says, I am just wondering how they were able to find ways of making their knowledge dominant. Why is Africa not the colonizers? I am just trying to understand how the gap came about. If you would like to react to that, we can go for it, or we can talk about it toward the end of the conversation.
Well, I think the gap, I mean, but I think it's just a matter of chronologically looking at the things, there's some articles I read about how Europe came to power and how they subjugated Africa, but it's just, you have to look at the things that have happened, that it's about history. How did they decide to divide up Africa? Quite frankly, I don't think I've ever asked that question. But the Berlin Conference happened. They had the resources to do it. They had the weapons to accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish. And I think probably slavery probably helped them. They had
Absolutely.
already known what was there on ground. Like they had some exploration of our lands. So it was just a matter of, let's plan how to conquer these people. So
Yeah.
they divided us up and conquered us ultimately.
Yeah, I don't think it was an accident. I think it was an economic decision.
Mm.
You know, I think it was, and you're right, slavery helped. I don't even, but particularly, I don't think I can say this is exactly how it happened. But over a century, a series of events, starting with slavery, to the best of my knowledge, occurred. And at some point, it had to become a concrete economic plan. If we can't, because I believe that not just humans were stolen during slavery, our whole system of economics was extracted, from the continent. And and it's just like how we are planning now. This is how to do it. You gather a critical mass, you build the knowledge that you need, and you begin to venture into those spaces where I don't think there was a spiritual, magical thing that happened. I think it was a matter of, we want to do this. Can we gather the most sinister knowledge people and researchers and economists and build this new world? And that's why the only way we can combat colonial legacies is through world building work. It's through building an alternative world. I'm going to shut my mouth, and then I'm going to ask if Dr. Hadiza has got comments about that, and then we'll move on to the final question for the day.
I think you hit a nail on the head when you said it's economic. I think it's economic. Even the Britain being in Nigeria, it didn't start out. I don't think we were amalgamated till 1900 or something. Before then, I can't remember that their company, something company, the name has missed me, where they were doing business in Nigeria before it was even Nigeria, and where they did it in India as well. So it was always, I think, economics. You can't move away from the extractive part of it. And we also must bear in mind that when you bring money into everything, you there's a collection of unlikely bedfellows. So the Royal Niger, thank you. There's a collection of unlikely bedfellows, and what that meant was that it wasn't only white people. There were also indigenous people who were benefiting from it and made it thrive. So once you bring money into things, it solidifies as a system of oppression. Money has a way of making things possible. I just also wanted to remind us to look at history in the longue durée, and to look at things as epistems of a particular era, that things shift and change, that it wasn't always this way, that empires, whatever empire is, they all have glory days, and they have times when they wane and times when they rise. So when we are championing whiteness and imperial structures, we must remember that they are jittery. They are standing on shifting grounds at the moment. Things are not as they seem. And I think for decolonization, these are times when you make wins and gains, when things are shaky, and things are shaky. You only need to see it clearly for what it is. These Western civilizations are not what they are anymore. They're threatened. They're threatened by new neocolonial powers, China, Russia. You can see that happening right before our eyes. So let's not give them more power than they deserve. They're jittery. And the saddest part is that we do not have, we haven't been able to rally ourselves to just take control of our future, and the agency that we talk about. I think that's my greatest frustration, that somehow Africa is still being scrambled for. There's a new scramble for Africa right before our eyes. China is shooting into Africa. So I do not know what to make of that as well, or as yet. I don't know if it's beneficial or if we're walking into another colonial situation. So I think my warning is that things are not always the same. Things change. So in analyzing, we need to remember that things are shifting and changing and evolving. And being a decolonial scholar means knowing these trends, or at least paying attention to them.
We're going to be here. We're going to be there and take advantage of weak moments and take advantage of I love what they are jittery, and they remain jittery. Thank you so much. I see a couple of comments in the chat that really, yeah. So we have Mame Ajoa Mafo from Ghana. Hi, Mame. Says, and then there is the fundamental idea of the colonizing spirit, the lust for conquest, and in and of itself, as a means to prop up their own fragile ideas of self-worth. Instead of attempting to derive a sense of their value internally, the only way they could find this is by attempting to subjugate others in relation to them. Whiteness, Europeanness, Westernness, etc. find value necessarily in contrast with the construction of the other that is less than. Okay, ma'am, you gotta share that reading material with me or I come to your house. That is such an insightful, approach to look at it. It complements the economic argument, because why do you want to, increase your power economically? So that you can improve your sense of self. And I think it just makes a bit of sense. And somebody mentioned to me a couple of years ago, said that Africans had been traveling across the world before colonizers started venturing onto the continent. There was a king in Mali that I don't remember the name at the moment, who used to travel and give gifts on his way, right? Apparently, Africans traveled with the eyes of an explorer to connect and see the world, but other people had other agendas. And I was randomly coming across a TV thing yesterday at something called Outlander, chronicling the history of colonization of Scotland. And it felt like I was watching a movie about Nigeria. Like, it was the same method of colonization, same method. When they got tired of extracting from their neighbors, they're like, yo, let's go across the ocean, there's more to steal. So I don't think it began with us, right? And I think as history has it was how do you say that thing, where it's like a head of a hydra, that is conducting activities in different areas at different times, Somebody else says, KK says, we can't underestimate how hungry, in all senses, and desperate Europe was. The discovery of the Americas and the establishment of slavery came right at the end of the Dark Ages, absolutely, yes. And the decimation of the Great Plague, there was an economic imperative. And yeah, absolutely. Those are kind of, the term othering or otherizing describes the reductive action of labeling and defining a person as subaltern native, as someone who belongs to the socially subordinate category of the other. You people are gonna make me cry on this call today. I am so excited. I love all the knowledge that you're sharing. I'm gonna move to the last question. Yeah, somebody says there are records of Africans being in the Americas even before Columbus. I think one of the things we're gonna do from this conversation is we are gonna look and see what materials we can find on, on history close to the end of the Dark Ages. And we're going to think about this, and we're going to develop a one-pager that kind of traces the journey onto slavery. And then we will be happy to share with you via our newsletter. So if you're not registered to receive newsletters from us, you may want to do that now. I don't know which of my colleagues are still online, Toby or Nana. Please, can we put the newsletter link so that people can join? And I am making a promise of a one-pager that tries and that properly attempts that question to link those two events in a coherent way that we can say, okay, these are the issues. And don't worry, when you see all the things you put in the chat box in that one-pager, just be like, wow, well done, Lara, for putting it together. Thank you so much, everyone. So there's more coming in the chat box, but I'm going to go to the last question, and we're going to have a quick Q&A at the end of the conversation. So last question for our speakers. How do we build new worlds of knowledge? And how do we ensure that this world of knowledge that we're building is ours and we have agency over what goes on? I'm going to begin with Dr. Hadiza.
I'm going to borrow from people who have come before me. I like the work of, and if you do not follow Sabelo and Ndlovu Gacheni, then please do. I have learned so much, like his Facebook page is a school in itself. If you do not follow Foluke Adebisi's African Skies, then please do. I always say, if you do not know who you are following on Twitter, that's when you have toxic Twitter. Like, carefully curate your spaces. So I like follow people who would teach you every day. So I like this whole concept of an ecology of knowledge. I think that's by De Santos. I don't even know if I should be quoting him because he's been a bit dodgy recently. But yeah, an ecology of knowledges, a buffet of knowledges, right? So I like this idea of a buffet of knowledges. I'm not sure I want to be restricted from learning anything. Because if you're restricting me from learning something, I'm asking why, right? So I see a future where we have an access to all kinds of knowledges, where people are able to have an access to what has gone before, what is coming, and what is present, right? If we have this buffet of knowledge, so we need an educational system that looks forward, but also learns lessons from the past. Like, what have we missed? What are we missing? What are, like I talked earlier about our strengths. What is our inherent strength in the way that our community and society is organized? So one of the things that I see that we're losing moving forward is our collectivistic way of life. Like Baraka talked about Ubuntu and whether we're even living the Ubuntu. I do not know that we are anymore. And I don't even I've been thinking, finding ways of resonances between Ubuntu and what is in northern Nigeria. And I think the closest I came to it, and I'm doing a mini research on that, is Mutunchi, right? And Mutunchi comes from the root word Mutung, human. And if you look at Ubuntu, it also comes from Umuntu, Mutum. It's basically, they derive from the same root word, and it's a recognition of our common humanity. I do not want a future that still divides. The white person, neurotypical white person, is not my enemy, right? It's not my enemy. We are fighting the same battles, basically, in different formats, right? Epistemic and systemic issues abound everywhere. I want to be able to create and build alliances. I want us to see what structures are oppressing us in our different ways. I need us to think of allyship, right? Solidarity, camaraderie. How do we move forward by carrying everyone along so that we're not constantly, like you said, that creation of scarcity that has us battling each other as if we all have to scramble for whatever is left, when really, when we recognize our common humanity, we realize that we're all in this together. So for me, how we move forward is by embracing a knowledge landscape that is rich, varied, and diverse, that calls, forgive my language, but I don't have any other way to put it, that calls bullshit on the things that would hold us captive, on the things that would have us lose our humanity. And the greatest of that is capitalism as an organizing principle. It has us thinking that we need to always have more than we need. And recognizing that all these systems of oppression are intertwined and they will not go down without a fight is perhaps the first step. I realize I've said so many first steps, so take your first step for whatever it is.
We will use them together, because at the end of the day, there's something I believe. I think one of the first time I actually considered myself, on this path, because I used to be like a typical international human rights lawyer, was when I considered that, the law will not work for me, because I'm not interested in step by step, try this, if it doesn't work, try that. At some point, we have to have many first steps, because we have to have our hands and our octopus tentacles in many different pots at the same time. And I think that that's actually something that we need to do, because we are fighting a multi-headed hydra, and we're not going to wait to quash capitalism before we get to the patriarchy, because we know that they're in solidarity with each other. Heterosexism, capitalism, patriarchy, chauvinism, ableism, all of them are in bed together. Recently, we watched the Nigerians use their money to extol the values of misogyny, on Twitter. So capitalism will come into aid patriarchy. Patriarchy will come into aid ableism. They work together. And so you are absolutely right. We need many first steps, many second steps, many third steps. We're not going to be able to conquer an interconnected. interconnected and interdependent system by addressing it as though it was one enemy or as though it is neutral. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. So I totally vibe with when you say the first step, because they are initial steps that we should actually take, right? So I really appreciate that. So Baraka, I don't know if you want to share with us, what do we need to do to build this future of knowledge that we're all talking about? Okay, I think Baraka may have dropped off the call.
No, I'm still here.
She's here. All right, thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to start. I can't remember the exact quote, but I remember reading something Frantz Fanon wrote, that he doesn't like the concept of over talking about something. I think one of the biggest weaknesses we have in this particular, decolonial world is that we talk a lot in circles. There's a lot of repeating the same things and the same concepts and coming up with new ideas, but there's a lack of, action. I love research, but I think actionable research should be the only research that should truly matter. Not that other forms of research don't matter, but what is the point of research that is more than 100 years old and isn't really bringing about change? I will say probably another thing about Fanon is that he's probably a little bit extreme in that he says there is the only way to do this is to just break apart and just be violent. Maybe violence may not be the answer, but there needs to be a redefinition of violence for us, in that we have to figure out a way to say no more. It's you've taken enough and you can't take more. And I think part of how we can do that is really start. The most important tool they use to divide up the world is really divide and rule. If we can come together, that is the first step, I think, to dismantling. We have to come together and decide that we are one team. We are working towards a common goal, and I think that is the first step. As Africans, Pan-Africanism, I feel like, is not truly an option for us at this point, because if we stay divided and we stay with separate identities, I'm not saying our countries have to be dismantled. I don't think that is possible. However, I think we need to come up with a way to become one in a different way, in a new modern African way. I always say that I feel modernity is always thought about it as synonymous with Westernization. For me, I feel like modernity, in a colloquial way, is just getting with the times. And I feel like there's a way to Africanize modernity, to become a modern African people, to use what we know and become a new set of people, to change our ways of doing things, take from what we know and restructure our society, because we are living under structural failures. Of course, I also think that one of the most important things that needs to be done, for my dissertation, as you saw, I did do some research about subalterns living in Nigeria and how the educational system further oppresses them. I think one of the main things that needs to be done is people who do I deem as subaltern, people who have been forgotten in the system. They are not the ethnic minorities in the Nigerian context, or wherever it is. If you're living in a country, whoever is on top, everywhere they created hierarchies. The hierarchy is the Westerners are on top. In some places, it's that it's a religious group that is on top. In other places, it's an ethnic group that is on top. But ultimately, dismantling the systems that they have left in place is how I think we can find new answers, because certain voices have been left out of conversation. Scholarly work is already rich coming out of Africa, despite the fact that it's not acknowledged. There are a lot of things we can go back to and learn from, but we need to figure out a way to make these things. And I honestly believe that there is no way to do that as just standing as Africans alone. I think that another thing is together especially, I feel the othering of humanity, of the global South, is so strong that if we do not figure out a way to work together, are you hearing me? I feel like my internet has gone.
I can still hear you. If we do not figure out a way to work together.
Yes, if we don't figure out a way to work together, it will always be still like a division thing. We as Africans have to work together with Latin Americans. We have to work together with Asians, because ultimately we are all victims of colonization, and we cannot choose to continue standing in the world they've created for us as we suffer from the same misfortunes. And because of that, I feel we can learn from each other on how to remove ourselves from where we're at today. So if we keep saying that we are only going to learn from one another as Africans, also is another problem, because it's like saying ideas do not have merit. And I believe that is that they took the best ideas that they found in the places where they colonized, and they made it their own, and they flourished based on that. So I think really the biggest important thing is to work together. Also work with Westerners, because there's no way you can really end a fight if you don't acknowledge it on two sides.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. So I'm hearing solidarity. There's something I've been saying since January. I'm saying solidarity is the next frontier. Actually, it's the last frontier. Like, we're going to have to decide, do we want to do away with, people are going to have to lose money, class and all of that stuff. But I believe that we can get there. Thank you so much for sharing.
I just wanted to quickly add, I think when we're talking about Ubuntu and how we all are connected, and I see so many people who have joined because they know someone's name. I've just been told that my co-speaker, Baraka, is married to a younger brother of ours. So Mama Sarah says hi. So yeah. I love how we're all interconnected.
Oh, yeah. We are all connected, aren't we?
Like, seriously. So it's beautiful, and I see so many names and people have added to the chat, and we may be the speakers, but we've learned so much by being in these spaces, and just that circle of relationality, how we're all really just a few degrees separated. So yes, yeah. That's lovely.
It's so true. Absolutely, absolutely. Oh yeah, lovely. Somebody's saying here in the chat that we need to employ Afrofuturism too. And learning from youth is important in so many ways, as they are already doing this work. Also, through the communities we create in digital spaces and in the ways that we speak and create, we've kind of created our safe spaces on the ground and in the shadows out of necessity and preservation. And it is worth acknowledging this as a success too. One of the most beautiful things I have read about from Bell Hooks, and even though I think that everything she has ever written in this life is so beautiful, I'm like a proper groupie. I don't know if you know, like if you see groupies following like musicians, I am that groupie for academics. I'm just like, can I come with you to your house? Can we discuss like in a Well, one of the most beautiful things I have read from Bell Hooks was something she said about the margins. She said, we create safe spaces on the margins so that we can go out and fight, but the margins is where we come back to rest. And so I resonate with Evelyn in terms of, it is a win, being able to actually even create pockets of spaces where these conversations can thrive, is a win. It's a beautiful thing. And learning from the youth, absolutely important. I think it is dangerous to discountenance the voice of young people within this fight. Somebody says we must employ the concept of Sankofa to begin the work of building a new world. Our ancestors have shown us how to engage the power of our imagination as the source of future building. We need to get back to that toolbox our ancestors gave us. We must go back. Somebody says, oh, there is a question here. Do we think this applies to stolen culture? Not only have they tried to impose whiteness and force this on us, there is also the centering of blackness the blackness that they find appealing. then take it away from us too, in a sense. They attempt to reclaim it as theirs. Okay, you guys are thinking, and I'm shaking. That's really, I don't know if anybody, our speakers or other people in the house, if you have reactions, comments, all of that, this is the time to kind of get that across. I'm going to read 2 more comments. Once you have that persuasive and consistency spirit, then I think you are able to conquer the world with or without the right resources. Sometimes with these people, it's just a mind game, mind reading game, which they have mastered so well. They know just when to shift the paradigm, not necessarily because they are well knowledgeable or have the right information or even resources. This is taking me back to both Baraka and Dr. Hadiza's comments about us taking responsibility and building our own worlds. I think there is a question that I've got here. How do we build new worlds of knowledge, acknowledging our inherent strengths in African traditional culture and religion, which sometimes are oppressive? Now, this is a question for the speakers and everyone in the house, because I've realized that there's so many scholars in the house. This is a question that says, how do we build new worlds using indigenous knowledge, acknowledging our inherent strengths, but also identifying things that are oppressive that we don't want to take on that journey with us?
Hi, should I attempt?
Yes,
Because
please.
only an
Yes,
attempt.
please. Absolutely.
How do we build new worlds? It's gonna be hard. And I think these are times for honest conversations. We all like our privileges. So for me, one of the things that I had to do as a scholar was to see what my privileges were. And I welcome everyone to do that just as a first step to decolonization. Do a positionality statement. A positionality statement is writing all the things that you think you are. So for the longest time, I think on my bio, it says something like something cliche and fancy, such as at the intersection of my race, faith, and gender, there you may find me, something like that. And I thought, oh, that is really cool, right? And I'm like, okay, I know what informs me. I know what gives me strength. I'm a woman, right? I'm an African. I want you to see me, see Africa, see my blackness. I don't shy away from that. It's till I try to unpick why in many situations and my voice is strong and loud when it needs to be. And I realized, you're missing something in your positionality statement. And that was class. That was privilege, right? Within the Nigerian society, whether I like it or not, whether I accept it or not, I have class privileges. And that understanding humbled me. But I think it also made me a better human and a better scholar, because I didn't bestow upon me the privileges of class, but I know what I can use it for. And I can use it to create a better world, a more equitable space. Well, sometimes does that mean giving away, or not giving away, losing some of my privileges? Yes, it does mean that. But how many of us are willing to lose that? How many of us are willing to confront our privileges? Because it's all right pointing an accusing finger at others and the way that power functions within them. But if we're starting with the self, then our first port of call is an honest conversation with ourselves and the things that make us who we are. And so how do we create a better world? Starting with ourselves and the things that we can control and the things that we can change. So for me, as someone who has studied Almajiranci, for instance, in a country that still has so many different Almajiri, yeah, I can say that the educational policies do not work. I can talk about all the ways that it's been failed. But what am I doing? And it was my very first conference, and I went with my mother, and she's an educationist as well. And I finished giving the talk, and she raised her hands, and I'm like, oh my God, if you know my mother, she's a tough customer. And she says, that is all beautiful, very nice English, you've done well. She says, but then so what? Like all this, your English and PhD, so what? Like what the details of the people that you're working with was what she didn't add, but what I inferred from it. So then it became about connecting theory with praxis, with my practice. How do I make a material change in the lives of the people that I theorize from? So that led me to continue to work. It's been how many years post PhD? I still work very closely with the people that I researched with. I still try to create change wherever I can. In a nutshell, we can all be change agents. Not a big thing. It's in the little ways that we function and move through our societies, space and time, temporalities. That's where we need to start from.
Thank you so much. I want to add something to that. I always say something, even before I knew anything about decolonization and all of that, that I feel like we didn't get the chance to evolve organically. I feel like as a continent, we kind of didn't get the chance to make mistakes and build. We just went straight from direct exploitation to indirect exploitation. And there was no time to kind of say, oh, you know what? Because at flag independence, for a few years, you could see that there was a nationalist energy in the air, or there was, I was not born at the time, but from what I've read, there was this nationalist approach to say, now we are free, now let's build. And somehow that building went down the drain. So I'm just trying to say that we have to call into question our notions of morality, our notions of what is good and bad, our notions of what is right and wrong, and situate them in a place where we think of how our behaviors affect others, how we are able to kind of, like Baraka really, really shared about, how we're able to honor diversity and honor self. There is a lot of teaching with us about moving away from the self, but self-mastery is where our liberation begins from, right? So when you say cultures and knowledges that may be oppressive, are we saying that we are unable to identify oppression as a people? In Yoruba, they say, "Ohun tí ò dá ò dá." It basically means that if something is bad, it's bad. Like there's no other way to look about it. However, the idea of cognitive, the cognitive distortions that permeate this world, that put on the table that everything is debatable, including dignity. Everything is debatable, including oppression. Everything is debatable, including knowledge. I think that worldview is not African. I think because if you look, that worldview is not something that is common in the global South. And so therefore, we need to tap into our ideas of self-mastery and love to shape the world around us, instead of looking at it through the lens of, oh, what if something is oppressive? Can't I stop doing it? It's that it is incumbent upon us to adopt, a world of morality that doesn't do things. For example, the things that we call moral are funny to me. There's so many standards of morality in the world, but people don't think that committing a genocide is immoral, right? Because it's debatable. We have to come to a place where some things are not debatable, where we say, okay, these people, dignity is inherent and should be respected. So when I think about the question of, indigenous knowledge or indigenous ways also have oppressive things, is that cultures evolve. Culture for people, not people for culture. I don't know, that's so simplistic, but cultures evolve, and the people, who subscribe to that culture will evolve. And as they evolve, those cultures will evolve. But the question is, do we even have the space of mind to evolve as a people while juggling capitalism and patriarchy and juggling all of these realities of this world? So like Dr. Hadiza said, it's an attempt just to kind of open up the wound a little bit more. I don't think that I have the answers. It's just to open the injury a little bit more so that more air can get into it. And I know that as we continue to have these rigorous conversations, these rigorous reflections and sessions, we are going to get closer and closer and closer And I have to say that I am immensely thankful for this conversation that we have had today. I don't know if I want to continue to read from the chat box because I'm moving towards like, I'm trying to think that maybe we can wrap up for the day. But I'm going to stop quickly at Baraka's and say, hi, Baraka, is there anything you would like to add, like a wrap up thought?
I'd like to, add to what Dr. Hadiza said about self-realization and acceptance of who you are as a person. I think it's very important in this particular journey of, decolonizing. As individuals, we need to place ourselves. Any researcher, I think every researcher needs to go and say, who am I? And in turn, kind of words are coming out of my mouth and what do they mean? Because your identity is really shaped by where you come from and the things you see every day. So I think part of my journey in all of this, I had to also acknowledge my privilege. I had to look at myself as an African who's more educated than most. I had to look at myself as what I am. And you have to remove yourself from that and try and see things. But sometimes that is very difficult. When you do research, you talk about the insider, outsider. We are, I think as educated Africans, we are insiders who are also outsiders. It's very difficult for us to decide for people who, because we're talking about subjugation of the masses and the realization, like we've said, all of us had a moment of realization. It doesn't happen naturally and it doesn't happen for most. One thing that we need to realize that as people who are thinking about these things, we need to realize that most people aren't. Most of our leaders aren't really thinking about their positionality as, holders, as structural makers or whatever it is. Teachers are not really realizing that they're just conformers. I think most people need to be awakened. I think that is one of the most important things. We need to unlearn a lot of things and relearn them in the way we choose to learn them, because we will never get that from the outside. I remember like when I was doing my master's, something had happened to me. I had a presentation about I took education and African studies and education. And in our class, we were split up into different groups of regions in Africa. And I happened to be in the Central African group. We had difficulties because none of us could speak French. And a lot of the literature that was coming out of Central Africa was French. So we just decided, let's stick to Cameroon. At least 20% of them are speaking English. So we'll get some research from that. And whether that was fortunate or unfortunate, Cameroon, I'm from the northeast of Nigeria, and Cameroon borders with the northeast of Nigeria. And we decided to do our research, to do a presentation about gender and how it affects gender and education and how girls are kept out of school. So we had a list of recommendations, and I remember making a recommendation about just teaching young girls about the virtues of staying in school. And one of the girls in my class who was white, I think Canadian, said, that would never work. They're being forced to get married. And I said, I think I could say this a little bit more than you. I know a little bit more on this topic than you, because these people, we speak the same language, we're from the same kind of area. And I can tell you a lot of young ladies decide they want to get married because one of their friends has gotten married. And it's usually like a ripple effect. So it's not really about what was being discussed. It was about the response I got. She said, I could never be right. And then my teacher said, you could never be right because I have done research in Ghana. And those weren't my findings. And I said, I didn't argue from that moment on. It was a self-reflective moment going, as an African and as a Northerner and as a female, I have, as a Northern Nigerian, I have certain responsibilities to myself, especially because I had been doing a lot of research on Nigeria, and I was not finding voices from where I was from, especially the female voice. So I said to myself, whether you like it or not, ultimately, you can't complain about something not being there and then not doing anything about it. So I honestly think that the best way to reject white superiority also is to do our part and try to bring our voices into the dialogue, because most of it is male and most of it is white. The only way to actually accomplish change, I think, is to figure out a way to bring ourselves into the space and decolonize our way of thinking and say to ourselves, our voices matter too, and they can actually make a change.
Yes, ma'am. That's a good place to end for the day. Our voices matter, and we will make a change. Thank you so much to our speakers, Baraka and Dr. Hadiza. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined us. I really, really appreciate this conversation. I have learned so much, and I am ready to, to kind of get back into the work that we do and use this knowledge to improve the work that we do. I really, really appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone who has joined us. You can follow us on Twitter, and you can also follow me personally on Twitter, or you can drop your Twitter handle. I will do the following in the chat box so that we can stay connected. I was telling my colleagues via WhatsApp, yes, we were gossiping. I was like, you know what? The scholars descended upon us today, and I feel blessed and refreshed. And so I really appreciate this interaction. Thank you so much. And I hope that everyone continues to grow in their work, continues to, to build this, our world that we are trying to create, a world where we are not subjugated, but we have our agency and dignity. And we are also not just doing that on an individualistic level, but on a communal level where we all grow together. So thank you once again. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. And we will see you on our social media and through our newsletter. And we will be coming back to invite you to more conversations. And please invite us to your conversations. Invite us to your teaching series. Invite us to your spaces. We are happy to come listen and learn from you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Remember, this task is never ending. You don't unlearn once. Remember, it will co-opt you.
Absolutely. Remember that it is not only enticing, it's captivating, and therefore we have to stay alert. All right. Thank you so much. We really appreciate. So you can take a moment to get in the chat box. Please, my Twitter name is my name, Omolara Oriye. If you want to leave yours in the chat, be happy to do that so we can follow each other and stay in contact. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely Friday. Lovely weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.